do right here is go back. Way back. Back into time.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Celebrating 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. This is the ReGeneration Podcast.
And now, here are your hosts, Sheldon Goldberg, Joe Matarazzo, and Kevin Castro.
Welcome, everyone. It is time once again for the ReGeneration Podcast. I'm Sheldon Goldberg, joined as always by Kevin Castro and Joe Matarazzo. Kevin, how are you this week?
Fantastic. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing
Good.
all right. Joe?
Yeah, living the dream.
All right.
Talking to my buddies, we're talking wrestling. We're everybody's well and healthy, and can't ask for much more than that these days.
That is
Living
true.
the dream in quarantine.
That is true.
That's right.
Well, this week on the ReGeneration Podcast, we're going to look at two more matches from the 20th Anniversary Collection, the NECW 20th Anniversary Collection, as we look back on 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. We are going to take a look at one of the most famous women's matches in NECW history. We're going to take a look at the match between Mistress Belmont defending the World Women's Wrestling Championship against Alexxis Neveah inside a steel cage. One of the all-time NECW classics. We're going to talk about that. That took place on August 8th of 2010. It was in NECW's 10th anniversary event. And then from there, we are going to talk about the Ballroom Blitz. We're going to go a few years back in time to August 18th, 2007. Sean Gorman, the manager of champions, dons his tuxedo and battles Nikki Roxx in her evening gown in a Ballroom Blitz tuxedo versus evening gown match. Two epic NECW World Women's Wrestling matches, and I thought what we would do this week is start by talking a little bit about the history of World Women's Wrestling and how it came to be and why it came to be and so forth, to kind of get you in, because in the 20th Anniversary Collection, there are 7 women's matches. If you include this Gorman-Nikki Roxx match, there's 7 women's matches. So women's wrestling had a very important part to play in our history. To give you sort of the background, I've got to give you a little bit of the geography of what was happening when World Women's Wrestling was started. Back in 2005, Bob Evans was the booker of New England Championship Wrestling, and it was sucking wind. It was not good. There was a lot of competition from a lot of other people. Not so much direct competition in terms of running the same town or the same area. It was just there were a lot of events around, and so the competition was for talent. Chaotic was pretty much doing its thing. We really didn't use anybody from Chaotic at that time. They were kind of their own little entity off to themselves. Steve Bradley's Wrestling Federation of America had started up. He started up in 2003, and a lot of the NECW crew, as we talked about on a previous podcast, went up to work for him. And Steve was running a lot of shows at the time. He was running, 4 or 5 shows a month at sometimes. So a lot of guys that we had depended on as mainstays were there and were not available to us. What ended up happening is our cards were being filled by a lot of Bob Evans students in his wrestling school, Slam Tech, or as I call it, Scam Tech. And not to denigrate any of the guys that he had at the time, because they were just kids learning how to work and learning how to wrestle and trying to make it in the business and so forth. And so I didn't really have any argument with any of them. It's just that they weren't ready for prime time. They weren't the better guys had found something elsewhere, and our cards were suffering for the most part because of it. So around this time, we're getting to 2005 now. In wrestling generally, there were a lot of women in the area. A lot of women started to train to wrestle and were wrestling in the area. And the reason for that is because WWE, or WWF at the time, was really pushing heavily the divas and so forth. And you had Trish Stratus, you had Lita, who had kind of opened up a whole new thing for girls who were kind of in the tomboy mode. And a lot of girls were influenced by her, and thus a lot of girls started training to wrestle. So there were like maybe 8 or 10 girls around, and if you are all aware of independent wrestling in New England, women's wrestling was pretty much an afterthought. There was maybe one women's match on a card, and that was it. And, you had 2 girls, if they were springing for it, they'd have a tag match, and that was it. So there were more girls than there was work for them. And I had always had an interest in promoting women's wrestling. I insisted on a women's match on every card. Bob Evans hated women's wrestling. Hated it with a purple passion. And, in fact, refused to book it. I would have to book the women's matches myself because he didn't want any part of it. Except, of course, when they were his students, in which case they had to go over, and they were the ones that were getting pushed. So, anyway, I decided during this period that I was going to do an experiment. We were going to do a doubleheader at Good Time Emporium in Somerville, Massachusetts. Good Time Emporium was a 100,000 square foot combination arcade, nightclub, batting cages, bowling alley, a huge indoor entertainment complex. And they had a little room which they called the nightclub. They actually used it as a nightclub for music acts and so forth. But we rented that. We had done many shows at Good Times, but we rented that and did an NECW show in the afternoon and an all-women show at night. We could get away with that because if you have a doubleheader in a building like this where the people don't have to leave, between shows, you clear the room out and they can go, get a hamburger. They can go play pool. They can go play the pinball machines. They can go use the basketball court or whatever, the bowling alley. So they didn't have to leave. There was stuff for them to do between cards. So we did this, and it was really successful. The women's part of it. Bob didn't want any part of it. He actually tried to sabotage it. He would have the guys come out during the women's matches and fire up and try to draw attention away from the girls. It was bad. But I knew at that point that it was going to work if I did it correctly. We did 2 of them like this. The first one, Bob really kind of hard tried to sabotage it. The second one, not so much, but he wanted to change finishes and wanted to get his way and so forth. And we parted company shortly thereafter. But when the time came for NECW and PWF to merge, I decided I was going to go ahead and launch the all-women's shows as its own promotion. That was a key thing. I wanted it to have its own brand and be its own thing. So in March of 2005, we launched World Women's Wrestling. And it was a success from day one. It got a ton of publicity. It drew well. The DVDs we put out sold pretty well. And that's how it came to be. The difficulty with it as time went on would be it's very hard to run 2 promotions at the same time. We did a very good job for a while of integrating the 2 things. We'd have World Women's Wrestling matches on the NECW cards, and we'd have some NECW elements here and there inside the Triple W cards, like Sean Gorman managing Tanya Lee, who at one point became the Triple W champion. So this was an idea that really, really captured the imagination of the local media. There was a point where Nikki Roxx, who we decided to build the company around, was in every major newspaper in the area. The Globe, the Herald, the Phoenix. We had a huge story, a full page on a Saturday. We had a whole page in the Boston Globe. And there was even a company that contacted us about doing a reality show based on the World Women's Wrestling brand. They shot a little pilot for it. That you can find in the NECW Legendary series on this YouTube channel if you search it out. So this was an idea that really, and it had to be because we were getting bombarded from all sides. I had to do something that was different. And that's the biggest challenge in promoting wrestling on this level, is to try to do something that's different from everybody else, to try to do something that no one else is doing, no one else was going to do, and would get eyeballs and PR on the company. And it worked like a charm. In fact, it almost worked too well, but I'm getting ahead of the story. We'll get to that a little bit later. So with that background, now that you know how it all came to be, let's talk about our first match. Let's talk about Mistress Belmont defending the World Women's Wrestling Championship against Alexxis Neveah inside a steel cage. This was a pretty historic match at the time that it took place. Joe, you were sitting there with me the whole time.
We had the best seat in the house.
We sure did.
That was unbelievable to watch, and to watch it back again and listen to the commentary. It was amazing to watch it all unfold again. And I was just, if I had shut the commentary off, I probably would have been saying the exact same things as it was happening as I was watching it again. It was classic. The good cage psychology going on. Having Belmont getting busted open was just unbelievable. The aggressiveness and the physicality that these two girls put in. Look at Alexis. She's what, all of 5 feet, if that.
Right.
And she was fighting like a 7-footer in there. It was amazing to watch again. And Gorman just being classic Gorman again,
right.
With his antics. The finish, I forget how we came up with the finish for that. With the climbing of the cage and kicking the door shut. Fantastic. Great finish.
Yeah, tremendous psychology.
Oh, and it was so good that here's Belmont, the big heel, is getting applause, leaving the ring, because the fans knew, they appreciated everything they just saw.
They knew they were seeing something that was pretty special.
Absolutely.
Now, Kevin, you weren't with us at the time, so you were seeing this with fresh eyes. What were your impressions?
How'd you think of the commentary?
The commentary was great. Everything about it I thought was great. One of the big takeaways, though, and Joe, you kind of touched upon it with Alexis. She had such an intensity whenever she was inside the ring. It was unmatched for the most part. And it's interesting because I don't feel that Impact Wrestling has capitalized off of that intensity.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
Even when she was in Women of Wrestling or as Sassy Massey, they don't have that intensity. Mm-hmm. She brings it, and she hits hard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she is not the same girl she was 10 years ago, how they're portraying her right now.
Right.
I don't know whether they know she has that fire in her.
We should show them that match. They should watch that match.
They watch that match.
They're doing themselves a disservice by not capitalizing.
Big injustice, yes.
I will say this about Alexxis Neveah, and that is, of all the people, and male or female, who ever worked for NECW, she's the one that came the furthest. From that little girl from New Bedford who came in the door and was just going to have some matches and whatever, to what she became in that match. And what she's gone on to be, it's just absolutely amazing. I'm so proud of her. She was saying, I don't want to be anything big. I just want to, I'm just doing this and I'm having a good time and I'm just going to do it, live for the moment and whatever. And I'm never going to be anything big. Baloney. She was just really, really blossomed. And this was the reason. And yeah, she worked for a lot of other people locally, but, this was the place that she really blossomed as a wrestler.
And one of the other things to keep in mind too is this was 2010.
Right, 10 years ago.
This was during the, as you were saying, the whole diva era. It was a completely different mindset, especially with the approach for women's wrestling. And then you had Alexis's intensity. Mm-hmm. You had Mistress Belmont, who did not fit the role of the stereotypical diva.
Right.
And if you look at her back then to the women that you see on television now, she was years ahead of her time.
Absolutely.
Years ahead of her time.
Yep. And you plug her in right now.
Absolutely. And I feel, again, a disservice, the fact that she isn't on television every week. I always felt when I saw her name on the card, it brought that card credibility, especially with the women's wrestling.
Right.
And over the years, she kind of became the gatekeeper of New England. Whenever the girls were training, when they were coming in, that's when you could see if they were going to make it, is how they could handle being in the ring with her. I loved the fact that they started outside and fought around the building. The part that popped me the most was when Belmont was climbing the cage, was pretty much out of it. Alexis grabs her, and the bump that Belmont takes
off the top of the cage,
flipping
straight
off
down
the top of the cage. It was insane.
Yep.
This whole company was so far ahead of its time. And you watch a match like that, and you realize it was 10 years ago. And you think about what's happening now. Now, women's cage matches, you see them fairly regularly in WWE.
Right.
But
I mean, this was way ahead of its time. Way, way, way ahead of its time. You know,
and one of the other things, too, that I want to just give you credit for as well is over the years seeing the different companies with cage matches, companies that I've been involved with cage matches, the fact that it wasn't the entire event, the Rage in the Cage, every match.
Right.
Nothing against those shows, but there's only so much you can do in the cage before it becomes redundant.
Right.
And it takes away from whatever the main event or the main story that you're going to... This story was built up, this was the payoff, and it was the way it should have been.
Belmont and Alexis had wrestled each other many times prior to this. And in this run leading up to the cage, we had to do something different with Belmont. And I had said, she's got to do something different. She's got to have a hold that's different. She's got to do something. She came out with the hood over her head. She did this crazy act that she'd gone insane or whatever. And, they had to put a hood over her head to control her until she got into the ring, and then Gorman would take off the hood. So this was to reinvent her to some degree. And, as time went on, women kind of fell away from wrestling in the area. Now, the area is pretty poor in terms of women's wrestling. But when we started Triple W, there was about 8 or 10 girls that you could get locally to put on those cards. And then we'd bring in a half a dozen girls from outside the area, and there's your card. There's your roster. It got harder and harder to do that because the girls were further away. And frankly, my partners at the time did not want to invest the money in bringing in a lot of outside talent. You'll see later in this series, we did bring in Malaya Hosaka, a great veteran for a number of shows, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. This was something that I was really, really proud of as a promoter, that we were able to pull something like this off. It wasn't the biggest draw, but I'm telling you, what they did for the time period that it took place in was really revolutionary.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was so much fun to watch it again, Sheldon. Brought me right back to when we were sitting right there.
And let's not forget about what Sean Gorman brought to the mat.
He's perfect.
Once again, the icing on the cake.
Yep. And he got what was coming to him, exactly what the fans wanted. And man, it's the little things he does. Between being outside the cage, his comments to Alexa while she's there, and him just that little bit of distraction to her, and then the way that at the end he goes over and gets the cage door open so that Belmont can try to escape through the door, and the setup was his timing is perfect.
Once again, we said last week that his level of polish for his level of experience was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, you've done a lot of managing. You would have to agree with that statement.
Absolutely. And I was actually just going to say, the thing that impresses me the most about Gorman is, as entertaining as he is, he does just enough to not take the attention away from what's going on in the match. He's getting enough heat and sharing it with the people that he's representing without making the show all about him, which is something that a lot of managers I don't want to say have trouble with, but it takes time to learn. And I think he's definitely someone to watch and study if that's the path that you want to take.
Absolutely.
And especially back then too, it was a lost art. You know, a male manager 10 years ago, even now, is very rare.
Yep, you didn't see it.
Television, I should say. On the indies, it's promoter's friend, someone that thinks they can do it. Right. There's a huge difference between someone that understands the process and someone that thinks that, I can do this. It's not something that anybody can just jump right into and be good at.
No.
That's for sure.
No, it's an art form.
That's for sure. Speaking of Sean Gorman, our second match this week involves Sean Gorman in the match itself. It is the legendary Ballroom Blitz match from August 18th, 2007. It's a tuxedo versus evening gown match. The Ballroom Blitz. I think Gorman was the one that came up with that name, which was tremendous. What we're going to do before we talk about the match is we're going to drop something in here. We're going to drop in an episode from our Legendary series. We're going to actually show it inside the podcast. You're going to see it in just a moment. This took place on May 11th of 2007. It's an angle that took place between Sean Gorman and Nikki Roxx. And to set it up for you, Gorman had cost Nikki Roxx the WWW Championship. Nikki Roxx had stolen Sean Gorman's white sport coat, and Gorman wanted it back. And from there, we're going to take you to the Legendary Series, Episode 8, Sean Gorman and Nikki Roxx. On his way to the ring, Sean Gorman, the mouthpiece of the East, leader of the Dynasty of Champions, and the man who I refer to as the late, great Tony Rumble would have said is the cure for happiness.
I have two problems tonight. The first one is having to look at all you people here in Denver. It's like a news story here. You're right, really ugly. But I think you know that one. My second problem is the fact that little stripper, Nikki Roxx, still has my nice white coat. So once again, I'm going to demand that she come out here, right now, and give me back my coat, or I am hijacking this show. I'm not going to leave.
Gorman demanding the presence of Nikki Roxx, and I believe he's about to get his wish. There she is, the former WWW champion, with that white sport coat that she so artfully modified. Nikki Roxx greeting her many, many fans here in New England Championship Wrestling. One of the most popular stars in the history of the promotion.
What we've got here is failure to communicate. As everyone can see, wrote a little thing on the back of my jacket. Yeah, hardy, hard. Real funny. Well, guess what? The joke's over. It's not funny. It's
heard that before.
What is your problem with me, anyhow?
What's my problem with you? Firstly, you cost me the WWW Championship. Secondly, you are probably the biggest geek I have ever had.
Oh, true statement right there.
So, you're asking me if I want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Let's do this. Let's do this the hard way.
Sounds like a challenge to me. Gorman, oh, wait a minute, here comes Sabotage. Dillinger and Edwards holding down Nikki Roxx.
You know what, Nikki? I gave you the chance to handle this like a lady, but you wanted to act like a bitch. So you know what? You've left me no other choice. I'm gonna treat you like a bitch. Get Gorman!
Oh, wait a minute, this can't be any good. Sean Gorman looking under the ring for something. That's a can of Alpo. That's dog food.
Here's a nice can of Alpo. Open wide, Nikki.
Oh, no, come on. Gorman smearing the face of Nikki Roxx with a can of dog food.
Here's your champion. Here's your champion. Hey, get my coat on.
Roxx defiled and humiliated by Sean Gorman, DC Dillinger, and Eddie Edwards. Dog food all over the ring. Nikki Roxx a mess. What a horrendous act by Gorman and Sabotage. Let's take you now to comments from Nikki Roxx.
Sean Gorman, I wish I could say that I can't believe that you would sink to the level of putting dog food in my face. But I can't say that. What I can say is I'm disappointed in myself for letting this happen, for letting you do this to me. So now I want to let you know, Sean Gorman, that this has taken a whole new level. Nobody does this to Nikki Roxx.
All right, so Nikki Roxx being force-fed a can of Alpo, all that led up to the Ballroom Blitz. Tuxedo versus evening gown. And if you had respect for Sean Gorman out of the ring as the manager, his stock goes way, way up when he actually participates in the match. Joe, this was just before you joined us, am I correct?
Yes.
All right. What were your impressions?
Whose idea was it to come up with the tuxedo and the evening gown match?
I'm not sure.
The basis of it.
I would not be shocked if it was Gorman's idea. Gorman and Nikki came up with that idea.
A great idea. This entire match revolves around Gorman. Mm-hmm. Gorman was the nucleus of this entire thing. Everything from when he tried to pull the low blow on Nikki, I actually laughed completely out loud. It popped me so hard. I went, "You gotta be kidding me. That was perfect." And the expression on his face, everything about, he's such a good sport. That's a guy who takes what he does serious, but doesn't take himself so serious that he can't go along with the joke.
Right.
And my hat's off to him in this match. Everything from the when he was trying to stall and then he was trying to leave, And then, out of the back, Alexis comes back in, and she was only Lexus back then,
right?
And tosses him back into the ring. So many elements, and it all revolved around his reaction and his timing. It was fantastic, very, very well done. And
when you think about it, Sean Gorman was never a wrestler, except that night.
Except that night.
I mean, it boggles the mind how good he was in his role.
Yeah.
Kevin, what did you think?
Right off the bat, they're in the ring. They're facing off. They're staring each other down. Gorman looks her dead in the eyes and says, "I'm going to punch you in the ovaries."
Yes, that's right.
And he said it so casually, as if this was an everyday occurrence in a fight. That seeing that right off the bat was definitely, taking off in the right direction. The physicality of the match I thought was good. I also liked the fact that there was only one tease really of him possibly getting the evening gown, and I thought that showed a lot of respect towards Nikki, as well as the crowd, and it's a different time. I mean, could you get away with that now? I don't know.
Well, there are lots of intergender matches now on the independent scene.
There are,
right, but
this was an intergender match done precisely the right way.
I agree with that.
Yes,
I agree with that 100%.
Because it was a gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when they fighting throughout the building,
right,
just enough. It was he would cower down just enough, and then when things got desperate, he lashed out. And it was just one of those very shady, very cowardly. I don't know. Perfect. I don't see how anyone could do that in that role any better. I do have to applaud you for your I've heard of tighty whities, but that must be stinky pinkies.
That was great too. That popped me. Yep. The bad wedding cake one. It looks like the top of a bad wedding cake.
A wedding cake that went wrong.
That's the one. That's it.
Yes.
And no.
Everything came together perfectly.
Right. It was such a highly anticipated match. And if you listen to the crowd, the people were so into it. It was unbelievable. They were more into that match than they were into the main event.
Well, you know what's funny is out of all the matches that we've seen and the ones that are coming up so far, this was the most fun match to watch. This was just an enjoyable. I wouldn't have, if this came on my TV, I wouldn't change the channel in the middle of this. It was that much fun to actually sit down and watch. So kudos to everybody involved on that.
Right. This was an intergender match that harkens back to things like, Jim Cornette versus Baby Doll.
Yes,
stuff like that.
Exactly.
That was kind of what that was modeled after. It was just executed perfectly. A little background on a couple of things. We talked about Lexus and Alexxis Neveah, and someone had asked me what the reason for the name change was. And I don't know if either one of you were aware of the story, but when she came into NECW, she was called Lexus. And people think that
I was there during this, so right. I do remember the story.
So people think that we're just a local company and nobody's aware of us, but we were doing these online TV shows that were seen all over the world, and you don't know how far-reaching what we were doing was. But one day I go to my P.O. box and there's a registered package from a Washington, D.C. law firm that represents Toyota Motor Corporation, saying that we're violating their trademark for Lexus automobiles by having a wrestler named Lexus. Even though it was spelled differently, even though I don't know how you can confuse a luxury automobile with a little girl from New Bedford. I still haven't figured that one out. But they threatened to sue us. They wanted to go after her. Yep. They demanded her address and her phone number. And no way was I doing that. We forced her to change her name. We had to. But it just goes to show you how over NECW was in a way that you wouldn't expect. I had one other incident like this. I'm sorry, you were going to say, Joe?
Just to add to that, they even went so far as to name at this point, Alexxis had gotten a spot on, I want to say it was TNA, and they changed her name to Mercedes Steel. Yes. If I'm not mistaken. And they even said she has a tendency of naming herself after vehicles, cars, and this was inappropriate and they weren't going to stand for it.
Right.
So, I mean, they even took it another step further.
Yep.
To follow her, not just us, but her too. Right. So, yeah, it's definitely the right choice at that point to protect her and change the name.
Well, these people have nothing but money. I mean, they sue people for fun,
Exactly.
That's a pastime of these big these big corporate law firms. But we had one other incident like that took place years before. And we had a guy wrestle for us. You probably know who he is, Tarzan Taylor. He also wrestled for us under the name of Matt Spectro. But, one day I'm going through my email and I see an email from somebody who says, oh, my son is a big Tarzan Taylor fan. Where can he get his dolls? Where can he get his t-shirts? And I'm thinking, like, it's this kid's mother or his aunt or his uncle or whatever is sending me this thing to make it look like this guy's really over. Like he's trying to impress us of how over he is by people asking for Tarzan Taylor merchandise or whatever. But it turned out that it was somebody who works for the law firm that represented the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate. Edgar Rice Burroughs, of course, was the author that created Tarzan.
Wow.
So that was another season. But by the time we got into that, he had moved on and was wrestling someplace else, so it wasn't our problem. But that the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate would try to come after us for Tarzan Taylor. And Tarzan is a name that's been used since time immemorial in pro wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
Killer Kowalski was at one point in his career called Tarzan Kowalski. There was Tarzan Tyler.
Tarzan Tyler.
There's a guy in Mexico, Tarzan Boy. Where they go after everybody? I don't think so. Crazy as that. So it just goes to show you that you think you're this little company that flies under the radar, and that is not so. We were not flying under the radar, at least under everybody's radar. That is for sure. I talked a little bit earlier about how all the publicity that World Women's Wrestling got was both a blessing and a curse, and this concerns Nikki Roxx. We had a somewhat of a contentious relationship with Nikki Roxx, and needlessly so. But here is the story behind it. We had taken the belt off of Nikki Roxx for a reason. She had worked a show in Connecticut that was promoted, I believe, by Joel Gertner. And this was a situation where they had promoted her as our champion, and she jobbed out to Mercedes Martinez. And this was on a show in Connecticut. And what none of them knew is that there was a nightclub in Connecticut that I was in talks with about running Triple W shows. They were going to buy shows from us, 3 or 4 a year. Apparently, they had gotten wind of this Joel Gertner show, and they saw her lose, and they weren't so interested anymore. So, I mean, she couldn't have known that. And while some people think that wins and losses don't matter, in some cases they do. But the problem was we had gotten so much publicity behind Triple W, and there was so much of a focus on Nikki Roxx. She was literally in every major newspaper in town. The Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, the Boston Phoenix. We even had a group of the Triple W girls on Maddie in the Morning on KISS 108, which is one of the big radio stations here if you're outside the area and aren't familiar with Boston media. Nobody gets that. Nobody gets publicity like that. This was absolutely, totally and completely unheard of. But what it also did is it automatically made Nikki Roxx somebody that had raised the attention in the wrestling world in general. We talked about Max Bauer last week, and him being on the front page of the Boston Herald and jobbing out. What people don't understand is that that's a career-making thing. It's so rare to get that type of publicity on that level that it immediately elevates the person that is the subject of that publicity. And in a sense, it made her almost too valuable for us. So it was only a matter of time before she got picked off and signed. So taking the belt off of her and having her chase it was the safer thing to do. It was something that we had to do. We really didn't have much of a choice, if you really think about it, because she had become too valuable for us. Eventually she well, let me jump back a little bit. Where she was pretty much exclusive to us. Once all that publicity hit, now all of a sudden she's wrestling for Chaotic Wrestling, which had never had women's matches at all. In fact, when she started over there, she wrestled men. So here we are catching lightning in a bottle, and she's opening up the bottle and handing out the lightning to, the guy up the street, So, I mean, on the one hand, like we were saying last week, you can't stop people from working other places. And I did a lot of things to help Nikki Roxx in the background. She got into Shimmer because of NECW and because of the Triple W stuff. I believe I got her booked. I want to say it was in Combat Zone Wrestling. The publicity that she had gotten and the notice that she had gotten from the press that we had gotten on her and the push that we were giving her, raised the attention of other people in the industry. Eventually she went to TNA, and when she went to TNA, Jim Cornette was there, working there, and I said to Jim, you may want to just, if you do me a small favor, when you see her, introduce yourself, let her know that we know each other, and, maybe kind of look out for her if you would. Yeah, sure, no problem. So she tells Sean Gorman, yeah, I was at my first TNA show, and Jim Cornette comes up to me and says, oh, you work for my friend Shelley up in Boston, blah, 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 blah. She goes, of all the things I have to be known about, I got to be known for that. She was dead to me after that.
Yeah, terrible.
After all we had done for her. And they gave her that Roxy Laveau gimmick, which, I mean, that's not her fault, but, what could have happened with her is she could still do independent dates. So she could have continued to be Nikki Roxx outside of, TNA, and, she could have been and should have been one of the bigger women's stars of that time, because she had the talent. She was talented in the ring, no question. But, sometimes people think that the push is about them, and it isn't always about them. And I've said this many times before, your push is not your property. People have to put you over. And you got to do business the right way. You have to have respect for, the other people that you work with and the people that you work for, because nobody in this business does it alone. If you could do it by yourself, it'd be stand-up comedy.
Yeah. Yep.
But one of the things too, I think you should put into perspective is the difference of being able to be in the newspaper and be on the station like Kiss 108 or on the radio then as opposed to now. Because, I mean, newspaper for the most part is a dead media now.
That's correct.
You figure anyone can hop on, Twitter or YouTube, TikTok, all these different things to get themselves out there and become quote-unquote TikTok famous or YouTube famous.
Right.
Completely different. I mean, that was a very impressive feat to accomplish, to not only get in the newspaper, but be on the front page of the Boston Globe, to be on a station that of Maddie in the Morning, which was number one in drive time. How many years?
Many years.
It's one of those things where I don't know if some of these young whippersnappers are really going to understand how important that was.
I mean, that was part of the NECW playbook, is to get publicity. We did things that got a lot of publicity. You could almost count on every year at least one or two major newspaper stories, major media pieces, whether it was a big picture in the calendar section of the Boston Globe, or whether it was a feature article, or I was sending press releases out all the time because I used to do PR for Broadway shows and shows on tour. So that was part of my world. That was what I knew. Today it's a different world, and the print media is not as important as it was before. But back in the day, you got yourself in the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald. That was money. You could count on the box office going up. Sure. I remember there was a show that we had in Quincy, and I want to say it was the wintertime or the early spring. I forget exactly what month it was, but anyway, we got a big picture of Tanya Lee in the calendar section when they had that in the Globe. The calendar was a separate section that they did every Thursday that told you basically what was going on in the area. So they promoted our show that was coming up in Quincy that Saturday. They had a big picture of Tanya Lee, all sexy looking and so forth, and they'd say, come and see the sultry looking Tanya Lee, blah, blah, blah. And the building sold out. It was not sold out that Thursday until that newspaper article hit, until that picture hit. But business jumped. You could almost count on it. And we were very careful in those days. I was careful of keeping track of all the people that were coming in, and if you bought your tickets online, I collected your email address, I collected your mailing address, you got postcards in the mail every month. This was the playbook of how NECW was promoted. And it's a lot of old school stuff, but these things were part of the way we marketed and sold our company, not just to the press, but to our fans. Interesting times, and an interesting look back at World Women's Wrestling, and why it was so important to NECW. And again, it faded for two reasons. It faded because of the decreasing number of women in the area. It faded also because the people that I was in business with at the time, they were guys who were wrestlers, and they were interested in guys wrestling. They weren't interested in women's wrestling. They looked down on it. And while I think they did have a certain respect for it, they didn't care about being in that business. They didn't see the potential of it. It just wasn't important to them. And running two companies is not so simple. It's not so simple running one company, let alone two.
Not the truth.
Right.
I don't know. Like Kevin said, as far as Belmont goes, what a workhorse she was.
Yeah.
And that she was a measuring stick. If you were going to make it in NECW, Triple W, if you could hang with her, you were going to be all right. She was our measuring stick.
Right.
In longevity, both of them.
Right.
Yeah.
You figured that was 10 years ago, and you just posted a video, what was it, last week, when we had the last woman standing match between the two of them. So it wasn't so much, just pop up, great match, never hear from, consistent.
Right.
Always pulling off great matches. Mm-hmm. Always connecting with the crowd, one way or the other, whether, as a face or a heel.
Right.
And always being a draw.
Alexis was somebody you could take anywhere. To any event, public event, whatever. She was great with the fans, great with people. She was a tremendous representative of the company. I used to kid her. I used to tell her that she was the Bruno Sammartino of NECW.
That's right. Yep. I remember you saying that to her.
She's just a phenomenal personal representative. The way she interacted with kids, the way she interacted with any media people. It was just, remember when we did the thing at the Garden?
The lacrosse
Boston
team.
Blazers?
Yeah.
Yeah. She was great with the little kids, and they just, they just loved her, Belmont,
good.
Belmont is really criminally underrated as far as women's wrestling goes. It's kind of sad that she didn't get a bigger platform.
Wrong era.
Maybe wrong era.
If she was there now, if that match 10 years ago was done today,
right.
she'd be picked up in a second. the style, everything about her is exactly what's going on right now.
Right.
And I don't know how busy her schedule has been, but the last time around, she has gotten herself in phenomenal shape.
Yes.
Last time we saw her, she is bodybuilding, working. She looks incredible.
Yeah.
And you know what? Probably one of the nicest people you'll ever meet.
Absolutely.
You know?
No question.
Yeah. Tons of respect for her. She's unbelievable.
Kayfabe.
Yeah, okay. We share a birthday, her and I. So she's one of my favorites. So.
All right. You know, I've got to tell you, I think that she's underappreciated by a lot of the bigger companies. And there was an incident that took place a few years ago. We did a women's version of the Iron 8 called the Iron Maiden, and we booked a girl to work that show from Connecticut who works under the name of Solo Darling. You remember her, Kevin, right?
Yep.
Well, Beyond Wrestling had started running all women's shows. And they put online a match between her and Belmont. And the promoter of that company, Drew Cordero is his name, was calling the match with Taylor Hendricks. And in his call of the match, he was basically saying that Belmont really never did anything, that Solo Darling had kind of a national name, and Belmont really wasn't anybody, and whatever. And I was really upset when I listened to that, because there are companies that Beyond is one of them. They're predatory companies. They downplay the local people so that when they bring the so-called indie names in, that their shows are going to get over and they're going to downgrade when the people locally go back to, their home companies or whatever. The people think less of them because, oh, well, they're not as good as, Gabe Sapolsky used to do that in Ring of Honor and in Dragon Gate and Evolve. He'd book local guys and have them sell tickets thinking that they're getting a big break, and then job them out and make it look like, the local companies aren't as good as their show that comes into town, their little carpet bag show. So I felt Belmont got a raw deal from him.
I take exception to it's one thing to bring them in and job her out. Mm-hmm. That'd be one thing. But if you're actually doing commentary where you're downplaying an opponent, then who the hell did your favorite person, the person you brought in, who the hell did she just beat then?
Right.
She beat a nobody. So
right.
If anything, you want your person to, you want them to look like they're bigger than or almost as big as your. Otherwise, they didn't beat anybody, and it doesn't matter. So you in fact hurt the person you're actually thinking that you're helping. But that's a rookie move. I don't know this guy personally. It is, but but you'll see that in the indies because they're ham and eggers at that point. But you don't ever do that. You know what I mean? You can't.
That's the problem with being an independent promoter. Unless you're running shows all the time, and you can basically employ people on a regular basis, then you have to put up with this because you can't control somebody else's booking. You can't control how they portray somebody else. And the talent, they just want to work.
Right.
They're not always savvy to how they're being portrayed. And, it's very easy for a Drew Cordero to take advantage of people locally. I mean, on their Beyond shows, they don't even pay the locals anymore.
Jeez.
They think they're getting a break. It wasn't their show. There was a kid that worked for us, Anthony Stone, Nick Amaral, Natalia's brother. He gets a chance to work in the ECW arena for Beyond Wrestling. This is a dream come true for this kid, to work in the ECW arena.
Sure.
He has a match against this kid named Rex Lawless or Lost Reckless or whatever, and the guy kicks him in the chest and basically caves his lungs in.
Jeez.
He could have died.
Real bad.
Did he really get hurt that bad?
He could have died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think he wrestled since.
Jeez.
I mean,
there's no excuse for that.
No, there isn't. This is a company that's had a history of dropping guys on their head and breaking their necks. I mean, this is a guy who they were running in a building that we were running in Bridgewater, the Knights of Columbus in Bridgewater.
Oh yeah,
you know it. You're familiar with it. Yep.
Yep.
And we were running shows there. They were running shows there. On one of their shows, one of their guys put another guy through a wall.
What?
Put him through a wall.
It's ridiculous.
That was the end of that venue for wrestling.
Well, that was the gimmick match, though, right?
Yeah, right.
Instead of a tables match, it's a walls match.
Right.
It's a walls match. Yeah.
Right.
The gimmick was letting them actually run. Jeez.
And Anthony Stone was a phenomenal talent too.
Mm-hmm. Always in great shape.
I don't think I'm familiar with him, and I feel bad about that now. I'll have to look him up.
Right. We'll dig up some footage on Anthony Stone on another occasion. What's everybody watching this week? What's everybody's occupying their time with outside of this?
I was all excited this last week after our show. I was talking last week. The Mandalorian season 2 hit, and big fan of the Mandalorian. With both my sons, Nick and Mason, we sat down Friday afternoon and sat there and watched it, and probably seen it 6 times since. Wow. Between that outside of wrestling, that's my big enjoyment there.
Sasha Banks
AEW,
is in there, right?
Yeah, she's supposed to be in there this season.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm not trying to throw out any spoilers, but there's Boba Fett coming back. Anybody, I'm a big Star Wars nerd. I love it. I could talk about it for days. But as far as wrestling, AEW, Eddie Kingston, come on. This guy is unbelievable. He has that gift that a guy like Dusty Rhodes had, where he is going to talk you into that building. He is going to talk you into buying that pay-per-view. He is as real gets. Right. His match with Moxley is going to. The funny part is he comes across as a heel, but I love him and I want to see him win because the story is so real. Right. It's so much passion. This kid has been stuck hiding in the indies for 18 years. And other than the little stints that he had in TNA and in the NWA, this kid is a superstar well beyond anything. There's nothing spectacular when you look at Eddie Kingston. When you look at him, you're not gonna do a second take on him. He opens his mouth, you will never forget who he is. Right. And that is a raw special talent that I wish him all the best. That
was the kind of thing you saw in the territory days that you don't see anymore.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kevin, what do you think?
About Eddie Kingston, yeah. I think that he's a phenomenal villain because he believes he is on the right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you want to cheer for him.
Yeah. Well, it's you can't disagree with what he's saying.
You can't call him a villain. If you want to see him win, he can't be a heel.
One of my favorite things when I would manage is I would go out and I would tell the crowd exactly what I was going to do. And then when I did it, they would all get mad. And then it's just like, but I just told you everything. And I would do this at the very beginning of the story. Mm-hmm. You know, I would say, I'm going, like, for an example, I'm going to take one of your heroes. Mm-hmm. He's going to turn. He's going to join me. And we're going to win this match. And then a few months later, we would do it. And everybody would be baffled. And it's like, well, I just told you. And that's one of the things that you can't disagree with anything that he's saying. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but you can't disagree with it.
I think it's the story, though. I think it's that it's that Rocky story. This guy's got he's coming up from nothing, and now he gets a shot. And the only reason why he got a shot was because he had to do things that he never thought he'd ever have to do to get it. And now the opportunity is in front of him. That is a long shot. That is the underdog. But you've got a heel fighting from underneath.
But
So he doesn't make him a heel.
Is he Rocky or is he Clubber Lang?
Wow.
See,
Very
that's the flip side of it.
Very interesting.
That's the flip side of it. So
it is.
If you look at it from a different perspective, he's seeing Moxley, who's gotten all these opportunities, and he went up, to be the sports entertainer, and everything was handed to him while he was, being grimy and fighting, in the smaller areas, trying to get his shot. He's Clubber Lang. He's not Rocky.
Here's what I like about this. And this is the best part of the whole story. We would not be talking about him a year ago.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about him a year ago.
Very
he is
true.
the number one thing on our minds right now when we're talking about wrestling. We went straight to Eddie Kingston.
Yep.
This kid has it. He has earned everything he's about to get because he deserves it. He's worked his ass off. And you know what? That's a testament. The guy was selling his ring gear because he didn't have enough money to survive. He was about to move from Florida back to New York with his mom at 38 years old. The story tells itself. When you start looking at a guy that his last ditched effort was this one shot he got on TNT fighting Cody, and look at what happened. He ended up with a contract out of the deal.
Yeah.
Now he's taking it another step. He was not supposed to be there. He's not what you would. No one would have picked him out of the crowd. First off, boom, throw him there. He made it so you cannot deny him anymore. I'm impressed as all holy hell with this kid. I wish him nothing but the best. I want to see him win. I want to see him be that bring everything to the forefront of everything he's ever chased.
Oddly enough, he owes that opportunity to Billy Corgan in the NWA.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what got him the last big break out there, for him to be seen and be heard. I had only heard of him that one time in TNA or Impact, right at the end there when everything was kind of mushing around. And I saw him and I was like, wow, this kid can talk. I didn't know anything really about him.
Right.
And then he disappeared. It was over with the whole LAX thing. That all disappeared. And then he showed up in NWA and I went, whoa, this kid's got something. And I had always heard the name on the Indies and Combat Zone and all. I had always heard the name, but it was but there was nothing that would have drawn me to him. This guy it's like a bug light, and you're just drawn right to it. Right. You got to go. So
it's why it's going to suck when it's a 45-second squash.
It's an I quit match. I'm going to tell you right now, he ain't ever saying I quit. I don't think that kid will ever say it. I wish I think it's awesome. I just think we need more people with that kind of drive. But see, now here you go again. You got an MJF. We were talking about this last week, Kev. You got an MJF and you've got Eddie Kingston. What Eddie Kingston has that MJF does not have right now is life experience. MJF can talk. He's 24 years old. This kid hasn't experienced half of what Eddie Kingston went through growing up. And Eddie Kingston found a way to tap into his background and his growing up and has portrayed it. Exactly. It's so hard to find. You show me a kid who comes up out of the ranks 19, 20 years old and he wants to be a heel. How are you going to be a heel? You know what I mean? What life experience do you have to bring to the table that show that you got screwed over or this or that? It takes a special person to be able to do something like that, to be able to portray it.
And a leather jacket.
Right. And, but they come across as being pompous or being, arrogant or entitled. That's easy. Eddie Kingston grew up, like you said, pain. Yeah. He watched things, happen. He struggled. He watched, the struggles of his family and trying to provide, and that's just, and it's sacrifices. You know what I mean? That experience is coming through, and good for him. And
that taps into the emotions of the audience.
That's it. You become invested. You can't help it. You can't if you're not emotionally invested when he's talking. enough to listen to the entire promo and be thinking about what's going to happen next, you don't have a heart or a soul. And I think that's what's missing a lot but they also let him go. You can tell he's got his bullet points, and they just let him go. And that passion comes through because it's real.
That's the biggest thing, is being able to express that passion. You know, because if I hand you a script and tell you that you're going to say this verbatim, number one, it's not your words.
Right.
Correct.
And number two, as you're trying to say it, you're more concerned with making sure you say everything that you're supposed to say, that you're going to lose that passion.
That's it. That's it. 100%.
Yeah, you are correct. Let's do something a little bit different at the end of the show. Let's think about what matches we want to talk about next week as part of our 20th anniversary collection. Let's continue on the theme of women's wrestling, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let's see. How about let's take a look at Ariel and Madison Eagles versus Jessie McKay and Alexxis Neveah.
Beautiful match.
For one. And how about Sumi Sakai and Deonna Purrazzo versus Team Sea Stars? 2 women's tag matches.
And the ring announcer in that match is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. If you do say so yourself.
As good as the commentary was on the cage match.
Exactly.
I can appreciate that.
All right. So that's what we have to look forward to next week. Don't forget, we want your questions, your comments. Send them to us at regenerationnecw@gmail.com. The matches that we've discussed on today's show, you can find linked below in the description. Any parting thoughts, gentlemen?
Just stay safe.
Don't do anything we wouldn't do.
Doesn't leave a lot.
Tape it.
Right. All right. Well, for Joe Matarazzo and Kevin Castro, Sheldon Goldberg here. We'll see you next week, folks. Thanks for joining us.
The Regeneration Podcast is a production of New England Championship Wrestling. To send us questions, comments, or feedback, email us at regenerationnecw@gmail.com.